And then me and my son, we went to, he had to have his driving, get his hours in when he was 16 to drive. So we drove all around the different places. And you can see him there in front of the sign that says Free Blacks of Israel Hill. And it says, just to the west here lies Israel Hill, settled to, I'm kind of guessing some of these words are so small, 1810, I think that says 1811, by approximately 90 formerly enslaved persons who received freedom and 350 acres from Judith Randolph under the will of her husband, Richard Randolph. This is important, cousin of Thomas Jefferson. These Israelites and other how do we connect back to that, right? So the next slide. So we want to make sure people know this is a fair use, and this is copyrighted material. If we use it, it's not ours. We want to make sure people understand that, and the views expressed is not those that's directly a position of Mamleket, Colonial, or its affiliates. So we want to make sure we do the legal stuff we're supposed to do. This is just for teaching and scholarship and research and criticism and so forth. All right. So, like we talked about, they had the northern tribe and the southern tribe. It's amazing. A lot of preachers and pastors don't talk about the northern and southern tribe. A lot of people that's been in the Christian church for a long time don't know that there was a division there. Like I didn't, because a lot of people didn't talk about that. So, so it's very important to understand that, because as it goes throughout time, the prophecies and even where we are now, it's very important, because remember, at least right current day Israel, they at least say they are Judah and Benjamin. Some of them say that. So where are the other 10 tribes, or 13 really? 11 really, because the Levi was Yah's tribe, right? And then Joseph broke out into 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim, right? So we know that that's very important to know, even from our heritage standpoint. Okay, that's very important for us to know about West Africa. So next slide. And we talked about Eldad the Danite and how he's had a lot of stories about the different people in West Africa and East Africa that was connected to the Israelites. So even in the North Africa, all the way into Spain, all the way into Iran. So we talked about that. So next. And then last week, we talked about the real Jews, the Igbos, right? So that was our focus. We talked about the Yoruba before. Now we're talking about the Igbos and some of their connection and who they were. So next. And then we showed some of the stuff that even, some of the Jewish people went there and talked about them and showed us the temple and, talked to them. Next. And that's when they talked to them, and they actually recognized them as the ancient Israelites, but yet they were still trying to convert them to Judaism. So I want to make sure that's understood. Judaism today is not what Judaism, what Judaism today is not what Judaism was back in the day. A Jew now is not, modern day Jew is not the same as the bloodline of Judah. It's been modernized to be more about believers of Judaism, current day rabbinical Judaism. So next we talked about that. And we talked about even how they, some Jewish teachers there talked about how they even recognize that we are the Israelites connected through the Igbo tribe. Some of us, there's also other tribes throughout through Africa, period. We talk about the Limba a lot, but also talked about, what's going on in the news and the media. So it's very important. But like I said, if you click on that one and watch it, they got cursing and stuff, so I don't promote cursing. But I want to make sure, at least from what we showed last week, you won't hear no cursing from what we showed last week when it talks about what Kanye West said and, how this guy who's doing the documentary about the West African Jews, what his thoughts were, and, how he talks about even how a lot of African Americans descend from the Igbos and are connected to those Israelites. All right. So this is important. We talked about this, right? So this is the Alan Godby is the Duke University professor back in 1930 when he talks about how a lot of the West Africans that were taken as slaves had connection to the Jewish religion, right? So they show that those were the ones that were actually sold more than even the rest of them because they were more isolated and sold out of Africa also. And sometimes they sold their own people, but that wasn't intentional because they didn't know who they are at this point, right? Some of them don't even know their cousin tribes or know how they are cousin tribes because of the year. This is some of it's thousands of years that they've been in West Africa, and they wouldn't know like some of the tribes that came that were their cousin tribes that came later on throughout time. But even that doesn't matter because probably not this week. Next week, we'll talk about how even Israel fought among each other. So that makes sense that they're fighting now, right? And how they sold each other into slavery, even way back in biblical times. But, that's what we got to make sure we understand. And that's why prophecy says we're going to come back together and not be jealous of one another. But next, all right, and we talked a little bit about this article here, and it was important because it talked about, this is a Jewish Federation of the Berkshires. So this is not anywhere here. These are not, these are modern day Jews talking about the connection of these Nigerian Jews. And he talks about the, I should turn that a different color. Ooh, it's a lot different on my screen than it is here on the TV at least. That the Nigerian, that some exiled Jews assimilated in Nigeria, right? And names Yoruba, who are the Ben Ephraim, not all of them, but some of them there are. And then you got the Nag, the Efik, and the Eboe, who had ancient religious practices similar to those in the Torah. So that's very important even today. So that's why I have this back up here. So next, and then it talks about the Igbo, right? So it says, we talked about this a little bit, and this is important for today as well. It says the largest group of Nigerian Jews is made up of the members of the Igbo, pronounced Eboe, tribe, while missionaries converted most of the Ebo's tribe to Christianity in the 19th century, and a small minority became Muslim in the 20th. The proud Eboe Jews never forgot their origins. The intriguing documentary, Re-Emerging the Jews of Nigeria, father Jews of the Eboe tribe, and they're dedicated to the faith of their dedication to the faith of their ancestors. In the course of the film, a couple of the Eboe Jews recalled their parents telling them that they were descendants from the Hebrews of long ago. So next slide. So we're going to show a little bit part. This is that film. This is actually a lot longer. We're only showing 3 minutes because this is their introduction to it. But they talk about, it's Jewish. I don't know if it's Jewish people, but it's not actually African American. It wasn't no Afro-based people that actually produced this. So, you go to their site and they made a whole documentary. Some of it, I think, in a certain part, if I remember from years ago when I looked at it, you see, it was 13 years ago. So for 13 years at least, people should know this history. Right, so the previous articles of the Jewish Federation in Berkshire, wherever that is, sound like somewhere in Europe, they know about it. Why don't African Americans know about this? Right, so it's been out there for 13 years, and there's no black African American pastor that looked at this. There's nobody who engaged and talk about these Eboe Jews, right? And it's so important because I'm going to show you how it connects back to our history. So. We'll show this first. I'm just going to go through some of the videos first. Wait a minute. Then after this, we'll show you even T.D. Jakes talks about his connection to the Eboe Jews, right? And that's been out for 7 years at least, right? So why this popular pastor talks about, well, I said all pastors, there's no pastors talking about it. I guess he's talking about it because he has other videos that talk more. We should show on the 1 minute one that talks about his connection to the Eboe Jews, right? The Ebos, right? So if he knows, why haven't everybody else know about their history of being connected to the Ebos, right? So then next after that, we'll go in and show a little bit from Will, Son of Yah. He has a lot of great material. We're not going to play the whole hour. We're going to play about 20 minutes to kind of show you how they migrated and how they connected from there, okay? So we can start showing those videos. So we definitely thank Yah for bringing people in our own community to kind of show some of this. Sometimes I see a lot of great materials, but I don't know if people want me to share or not, and how I don't want to get all into that kind of stuff. So I kind of shy away, but there's a lot more information than what I share from these people. There's a whole bunch of people doing great work that's out there that I even learned from. So, hopefully with their approval in the future, we can show some of their stuff as well. So next.
From deep inside Africa, a sound is emanating that is causing reverberations around the world. It's the sound of Judaism.
Also, just keep in mind that these people also converted to Judaism, modern day Judaism, right after they found out who they are. So just want to make sure make sure that's why some of them are wearing some of more of the modern day stuff around Judaism now with the stars and stuff like that. But as we read last week from the article that said that they actually descended to West Africa before the Talmud, right? So it shows you that this stuff is what is being brought to them, and them being told, because our people, we don't even know who we are. So now that we know who we are, starting to come into understanding, we need to go and teach our first temple Yahwehism, they call it, to them in light of the Messiah. So that's why we're Messianic, Hebrew Messianic, not Messianic Judaism, but Hebrew Messianic, because we believe it from what the Hebrew people taught, and not what the current religion of Judaism teaches today. Just want to make sure that was clear.
A sound of a people casting off 2 centuries of colonialism, returning to what they say are their native roots.
I know from birth I'm a Jew. Only I know that my forefather missed the way.
I grew up alongside every other Eboe youth. We kept on hearing that Eboe people came from Israel.
There was a story my mom told me at the age of 6 years. I never forget. He said, the Igbos are Jews.
And it's the story of one man, Shemuel, who went searching for what that meant and found answers on the internet, prompting a journey that led him to a community of thousands of Jews. A place where resources are few, but commitment transcends. Through prayer, practice, ritual, diet, and song. But this is also the sound of doubt from Jews in America.
They would ask me, are you from America or where? I said, no, I'm a Nigerian. They say, you black? I said, yes. They said, no, it's not true.
And rejection from family and friends.
I am like an outcast among them.
And in this volatile Christian-Muslim nation, doubt often turns to violence. This is the story of the Eboe, 25 million strong, a people once under siege by their very own government.
Biafra declared its independence.
And a people once captured and shipped across the Atlantic by the hundreds of thousands. A people who helped build America, and a people whose descendants are now discovering their Eboe roots, raising questions of cultural.
So once again, they connected back to African Americans, right? So this is not us saying this, right? It's just not a whole bunch of African American, Afro power, Black power kind of stuff that people try to make it. You see, they even have problems even in Nigeria trying to understand their heritage and without getting persecuted by their own people, and also by, as they said, American Jews, right, that are talking against, like, not accepting and fighting. Now there are some that accept as well. I've been invited to a synagogue before and shared with some information about some of the Black Jews, as they call them. Well, they call themselves really up in Harlem and stuff, and how they actually were in the Jewish communities as well, and being singers, and I think they call them cantors, and as well. But there is the whole thing stigma about being not accepting your West African heritage. And it's not that we're not accepting West African heritage, but we know that it was a part of our ancestry coming from migrating from Israel into West Africa. And that's actually is completing the prophecy that Yah has called us to understand, to be in the people. But also there was a part, showing how he was all the way in Nigeria without much resources, without, you see him in look like a computer lab. We got computers, we got phones, we got everything at our disposal here in America. And there's less people with that dedication trying to seek out who they are as a people, right? Understand their heritage, understand what it means to connect to Yah. And, I feel like Yah says, too much is given, much is required, right? So it's like, when we stand before him, how is he going to look when we're not even, some of us are not even trying to search out and seek out who we are. And we've been given so many resources here in America, and they are struggling, and they're still trying to do the things that Yah has tried to call them to the best of their understanding, right? So, I just, look at these things and I'm like, wow. And there was a man named, I think his name is Remney. So you can look at him. He has a lot of books and stuff. He went to some of the colleges here and learned, I think what is it, anthropology? I can't say, I might be saying it wrong, but to basically research and study cultures and stuff throughout the world, and for him to study his own culture and his own connection back to the Israelite heritage there. But we also have some Hebrew Messianic people there as well that we fellowship with as well, to give us, more from a Messianic approach, and also to look through some of the people that's been trying to give them money and getting them to convert to modern day Judaism, right? So we wanted to make sure that that's understood. But you can see they're connecting to they're saying that African Americans connect to Eboes, who connect to Israelites. So, all right.
Identity for countless African Americans.
Many African Americans actually do not know that they have Igbo heritage. The chances of their being Igbo is much, much higher than their chances of coming from Ghana or from Western Nigeria.
If you're from the right county in Virginia, you probably have a 60% chance of having Eboe ancestry.
It's a story of the strength of belief, ancestry, and community. Boosted by a visitor who inspires everyone and helps take Shemuel's dreams to a whole new reality. The Jews of Nigeria are re-emerging.
So we see this came out in 2012. So that's been a long time for us not to know any of this history for the last 13 years for those. And like the man said, a lot of us don't know that we're connected to the Eboes, right? So why don't we know, right? Why are they taking stuff out of schools and history out of school and stuff like that? I just think it's all connected. So this is T.D. Jakes. You hear him talking about his connection as well.
My ancestors were Eboes from Nigeria. And Ebos are called black Jews, that they're industrious, that they go after things, that they're hard-working people. So all the way back in my DNA, we were self-sufficient. And all of them are sitting here. Folks whose name I can't even call. So what we're talking about is culture, okay? And not racial culture, family culture. Where the demonstration of what my father decided what grinding was. You weren't grinding till daddy said you were grinding.
Gotcha.
Take your hands out your pocket, boy, like you got $1 million in your pocket. They trained us not to be lazy. They talked about lazy like it was a disease. I mean, like the worst thing you can do.
All right, so you can see he talks about the Eboe culture, right, being connected as well, right? So he said Ebos are like Jews. So he didn't really say it all the way because he, still political. And then later on, he pulls back all the way in one of his services after that. But then he has other episodes where you can even see on the Nigerian news where they're talking about his connection back to the Ebos who are Jews. So just type in TD Jakes Eboe or Igbo, and you will see it, right? So these are things that's being, he's very popular, or was, before all the scandal stuff came about. But he was very popular within the Christian church, not just Black Christian, but Christian church altogether. And why don't we still know these things within the church, right? The Black church of America. Why don't they teach or talk about it when he was very outspoken about it, right? And the connections around it. So it just shows you there was something going on. So this is Will, Son of Yah. We're going to fast forward maybe about 3-4 minutes within, just to get past some of the introduction for time's sake. But he's going to talk. Well, that's good. He's going to talk about the Ebos there as well. So you can play it right there.
Where the 10 tribes of Israel have gone. And I was able to find in Masechet Sanhedrin, page 94, that the Gemara asked where the 10 tribes have gone, and clearly Mar Zutra states to Africa. Yeah. Want you to know that it was not sufficient for me to
We are Jewish people. We are Igbos people.
All right, shalom, shalom, everybody. Shalom, shalom. Shalom, salamah. Peace and blessings. Udu chalama to the Eboe brothers and sisters out there. Welcome back, welcome back. Thank you for tuning in today. And as you can tell by the title, we will be getting into some Igbo Israelite history today. We will be getting into some Igbo Israelite history. All right, let's go ahead and give all praises, honor, and glory to Abba Yah above for bringing us here today to review this information and to restore our nation piece by piece, video by video, person by person, scripture by scripture, source by source. All right. We know ultimately the Most High will move his hand and restore us as a nation in due time. But for now, we're going to continue to review our history and learn everything that we've been missing out on. All right. So, quick overview. We will be reviewing migrations of the Eboe people of Nigeria, starting with the first migrations between the Exodus and settling in Palestine or Israel, with Gad's sons branching off, migrating back through Upper Egypt, Nubia, and west across Sahara, reaching Nigeria around 1303 BCE. The second migration happening following the Assyrian exile, with another branch of Israelites reaching Eboe land circa 638 BCE. As well as a third migration around 740 CE from Syria, followed by recent migrations of Sephardics and North African Israelites from Carthage, circa 1400s through the 1600s AD. All right, so recently.
So just look at the difference in those dates, right? So that's why I said we're talking about thousands of years difference. So as these tribes come back, go to West Africa or Africa as a whole, they probably all don't know who they are and the differences between them and how they all are connected. They might know that they are, people of Israelites that's living in that area and they're moving to that area. But just think about after they're there for a while and migrating, integrating with the people, even like, we said like the Yoruba Ben Ephraim and, the Eboe tribe and the one that there's some Akans that are connected. So all these different tribes are among each other and they don't remember all their history even today, right? They don't even know all their history, even how they all migrated. They just hear stories and stuff, which is very helpful. Some of them do know the migrations through their songs and stuff, but some of them don't. So now you're putting all these people together and you can see why there's conflict among them and, inner fighting that Yah has to resolve, even like we are here in America. When we have, gangs or West Coast, East Coast, all those divisions, they had the colorism of light skin versus dark skin back in the day. So we always have some divisions that's among us that needs to be reconciled for us to come together. And Yah said in his word, love him, but also love your neighbor as yourself, right? That we're supposed to be loving our brothers and our sisters, our ox and our akams and our coots. So we're supposed to be loving each other as one. And that's what the first reconciliation needs to be done is within our own community of our loving each other, right? People are talking about us going to Israel and taking over. It's like, we go there, then it's still going to be a mess if we don't first get ourselves together, even when the places that we already are connected to, right? So I ask sometimes of our brothers and sisters over in Africa who know that they're Israelites, I'm like, okay, so what about the tribes there? Are y'all talking together? Are y'all trying to, come together as a people for, if they can't come together as a people there, how can we coming overseas with a different language, culture, and everything? It's going to be harder for us to come together with them as well, right? So, it's just that remnant that Yah is going to call out for us to try to come together. And, that's what's happening, remnant of people or, that have that heart, the desire to reach out to us here in America and throughout the diaspora. And also us, we need to be reaching out to our people over in Africa or even in Spain and Portugal. Some of them still remnant still there. All throughout the Caribbeans to South America and everywhere else, right? That we need to be reaching out, even in, people, there's some African Israelites in the Middle East, right? There as well. So we got to, people in Fuji, they know who they are all the way in the South Pacific. They know who they are as well. So but with us having the means and the resources and the technology, to understand who our history is, we need to be doing those things for our families so our children can also know to reach out and know who they are as well. All right.
So, Job chapter 8, verses 6 through 8. We're going to read a quick verse before we start off. It says, if thou wert pure and upright, surely now he would awake for thee and make the habitation of thy righteousness prosperous. Though thy beginning was small, yet thy latter end shall greatly increase. For inquire, I pray thee, of the former age, and prepare thyself to the search of their fathers. All right, so that's what we're doing today. We're preparing ourselves for the search of our fathers. I know a lot of people like to say we ain't supposed to be doing this or searching into our genealogy, doing this and doing that. But hey, we've been scattered, we've been dispersed, and we've been cut off from our history. So it's up to us to restore that and relearn that. So Igbo, also called Eboe, people living chiefly in southern Nigeria who speak Igbo, a language of the Benue Congo branch of the Niger-Congo language family. The Igbo may be grouped into the following main cultural divisions: northern, southern, western, eastern, or cross-river and northeastern. Before European colonization, the Eboe were not united as a single people but lived in anonymous local communities. By the mid-20th century, however, a sense of ethnic identity was strongly developed, and the Igbo-dominated eastern region of Nigeria tried to unilaterally secede from Nigeria in 1967 as the independent nation of Biafra. By the turn of the 21st century, the Igbo numbered some 20 million. All right, and that's just counting the people that's within Nigeria. That's not counting the diaspora, all right? That's not counting the Ebos in America, in Canada, in Mexico, Brazil, Jamaica, all right? That ain't counting the Ebos scattered to the four corners. All right. So we're going to start at the very top, and you got the source at the bottom right for the article. It says, Ira and his entourage continued their migration southward until they finally settled at a place known to us today as Ogul Ire, the ancestral home of the Eboe, around 1303 BC, at the confluence of the two rivers Izu and Amambala, a tributary of the great river Niger. He argues further that in Agulari today, there is a place called Agbanabo Izu na Amabala, all right, the confluence of the rivers Izu and Amabala, which form the Anambra River. Here it is believed Ire landed with his entourage before moving to settle in Obu Gad, Agulari. The Obu Gad, that is Gad's memorial place, all right, so Gad's memorial place is apparently visible, and this remains an epic center for global tourism site in Agulari town of Anambra State to date. All right,
So just remember last time we, had that video about Obagad where they were going and meet the king and talked about, who they were. So it just shows you that's also, he's referring to the same place. And Anambra, I showed you also based on how 23andMe used to show, was showing that a lot of our DNA, some of us comes from Anambra, which was like 90-some% Eboe. Right, so it's important to understand some of these places, even though, like I said, it has to be repetition. I don't remember all these names with Izu and Ambala, Amumbala, so it's got to be repetition. The more that we teach and more go over these places. And as you're looking now, you got a phone or something, you can just pull it up, type in the place, right? And see, kind of get familiar with that area and what that place is at, because you're going to hear it repeated, especially in Nambra, in multiple places. Right, so you might can find some cousins, right? So this is also about our genealogy and lineage. So we got to know and understand this. So if we're looking up through Ancestry.com or some kind of DNA site, that you'll start hearing last names. You can type in some of those last names and see if they pop up as some of your DNA connections, which I have done before, and some of the names pop up. So it's very important for us to know, number one, what is your DNA connected to what tribes and stuff, so then you can actually search and start to find some of these connections and to know for yourself who you are as Israel, right? Because if you connect to these tribes, that means you connect to Israel as well, right? So it's very important for us to do that. So I know some of this he's going through a lot, but this is valuable, very valuable information if you take advantage of it and understand what he's talking about, all right? So I also said last time I said Fuji. I guess I'm thinking about the old music group, but it's Fiji. Fiji's of South Pacific as well. All right.
you see that it's stated that the ancestor of the Eboe was named Ire, and he settled around 1303 BCE in Nigeria. So let's build on that. And this is a depiction of Ire and the entourage on some of his kids and the people that was with him, all right, during this migration. Some of his direct descendants. All right, and here's a picture of King Ire himself. All right, Ire of Agulari. All right, so to find out who Ire is, we're going to take it to the Bible. And we're going to take it all the way to Genesis 46 and chapters 46, verses 16. And when doing that, we see it says, and the sons of Gad, Zephon, Hagi, Shuni, Esbon, Eri, and Arodi, and Ureli. All right. So we see that Eri is one of the sons of Gad. So keep in mind that we mentioned off these two names, Arodi and Ureli, all right, because they're going to come up later on throughout this video. But our main point of going to Genesis 46 was to bring out the fact that the son of Gad is the father or the forefather of the Eboes, all right? And his name was Eri. Furthermore, we see in Numbers 26, verses 16 through 18, during the time of the census, that Eri and the Erites was counted off, Arod and the Arodites was listed off, and Areli and the family of the Arelites was listed off as well. And these were the families of the children of Gad, according to those that were numbered of them, 40,500. All right, my main point of bringing this out is showing that these families were listed off during the time of the census within the wilderness. It's because some of our Eboe brothers and sisters will tell you that they migrated prior to the 10 plagues popping off and prior to the Exodus from Egypt. And according to the Bible, that couldn't have happened. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying it happened after the census was taken, all right? And they was migrating back to Israel, or they was migrating to Israel, is when these sons migrated off from the rest of the Gadites. And we're going to review that in a couple of slides. Furthermore, proof that the Ebos migrated from Egypt, all right, or after the Exodus, we see Egyptian slaves with the same bonnet/head caps as the Ebos during the ancient times, all right, same cap with the feather, same cap with the feather. These are obviously slaves with the shackles chained to them. We see they tied up from the neck, got the hands tied up as well. And another thing to peep knowledge too is the ancient Eboe pyramids, the ensued pyramids, all right? This is coming from an article titled The Amazing Eboe Pyramids of West Africa and Evidence of Ancient Eboe Connection with Ancient Nubia, all right? And this is just putting a link between their migrations and them picking up influences on the way to Nigeria from these different places they migrated from, like Egypt and Nubia. All right. And it says in 1935, G.I. Jones and anthropologists took pictures of some ancient Eboe pyramids at the town of Nsud, Udi in Enugu State, Nigeria. These amazing works of our forefathers' pyramids are 10 in number. All right, so there's 10 of these pyramids. The ensued pyramids were built by the Erie era Igbo, who had a large Judeo-Nubian content. Recall that in the book, History of the Eboe World, research shows that many years ago, this group joined the pre-existing Ebos. The ensued pyramids were built by the Erie era Ebos, who had a large Judeo content. Continuing, he states that these Erie era Ebos came from Erie Bengas household in the Chinnaroth area in Canaan, all right? In the Chinnaroth area in Canaan. And from
So just also notice the Judeo, right? Nubian. So Nubians, most people connect to, Africans in the East Africa, like Nubians and close to Egypt. But it says Judeo-Nubian as well, connecting them to also to the children of Israel. So there are some people, some scholars now that saying they're rewriting some of the history because they're trying to say that the Israelites actually came out of the Horn of Africa, the Nubian area. So we might play that in the future. But it's interesting now that, that connection is changing from what they were saying were connected to the Europeans that came into the Levant or Middle East area to now being that they were people of Nubian origin going into the Levant area in that area as well. So just, saying when you hear Nubian and Judeo, those type of keywords, just want to make sure you understand. And it's talking about Erie Igbos, right? The Erie comes from the children of the son of Erie of Gad. So you'll even hear like that the Jewish man that came that went to the temple. He will say that the Gad are the bad people, and they have to repay for what they did, and that's why slavery. But just want to make sure you're able to connect to some of the things that they will talk about in both positive and negative ways. Also, all right. Thank you.
The households of the South Nubian chieftains he met in Shakwar area of Egypt, Sudan. All right, so that's furthermore evidence of this migration from Egypt through Nubia, and even with the influences of these ancient pyramids that haven't been kept up to date and really not even spoken about. All right, so we just see this influence of them migrating through Nubia, through Egypt, all right, and then bringing it back to Western Africa. So we got to get rid and dig. And to do that, we're going to go to Finding Gad, the quest for the lost tribe of Gad. And just keep in mind what I said about what some of the Ebos say about their origins and how they migrated prior to the Exodus. All right. According to the Bible, Gad's sons were counted in the census, so it had to be after the census. But we're gonna start right here. It says, the legend of the oral traditions goes that while in Egypt, living among other nations who also resided there to escape the famine, Gad's son Eri, his younger brothers Areli and Arodi, along with Eri's wife Ishmael, and other relatives such as Ijah, believed possibly to be an offspring of Zebulun, Edo, Egala, and Edoma, possibly and likely descendants of Esau Edom, saw the coming persecution of the future Egyptian bondage and left with an Arab man named Adudawa, a Babylonian and said father of the Yoruba tribe of Nigeria, and his relatives, and journeyed further down into Africa, crossing the Nile River into Sudan, Old Ethiopia, to Chad, and eventually Lokogia, which is now the present day Nigeria, all right, by way of River Benue, and then through the River Niger, where they eventually landed in Agulari and what is now known today as Nigeria around 1305 BCE. All right, so we have this understanding that around 1305, between 1310, that Ire and his peoples settled within Nigeria. So now we're going to get a witness on that from an Eboe himself.
We are called the tribe of Gad because
So one thing I want y'all to notice what he said that the man traveled with the Yoruba ancestor as well, right? So it shows you that they were both of the same origin of Israel, but then they start breaking off and going to different areas. And of course, they call themselves different names based upon, just like we do now, based upon, wherever place of origin or name of a certain patriarch. And that's when they start breaking off into, so really, there's another video, which I'm not going to show today, where a guy talks about how the Yoruba and Igbos have more similarities in their language and culture than they even know, even from their migration stories also. So once again, another tribe that's all connected to some of these people in Togoland, and you'll see some of this later on. I'm going to show some of my DNA and some ancestry stuff, so you can also connect and understand how, some of these connections also could be done. But it's important to understand, these different tribes, which, when you start talking about Nigeria, right, all these different tribes are being taken and fighting and being sent in the slave trade, but a lot of them are connected also, all right? So remember, this is the guy I was talking about. He talks about God as being, bad tribe and stuff sometimes. But he also, you can see, I don't think we showed this last week, but you can hear how he's going to even talk about how not just their Ebos are not just from Gad, that they're from other of the 12 tribes of Israel. They're from other tribes as well. So Judah and some of the other ones they're going to talk about, and he's going to lead into that, and that's where we'll probably end. But that's the reason why I say I show you this video so you can go back and look at the whole thing, but you can see how they all are connected too. All right.
The first person to enter here among all the tribes is God himself. But we have other tribes scattered all over the place. We have the tribe of Judah, we have so many
the tribe of Dan
and Levi in this very place.
Right.
Now, but all put together, like we have already said most of the time, that inside every Jew is the 12 tribe.
Absolutely.
So we are made up of all the tribe of Israel here in Nigeria.
I understand that. Yeah. But there's some uniqueness here that we cannot ignore with the tribe of God. Yes, there is some uniqueness.
Yes.
So as the brothers just confirmed, the Gadites were the first Israelites to touch Nigeria, but they have other Israelites scattered throughout Eboe land, but we're going to touch on that later on in this video. All right, so now that we got that migration out the way, we're going to jump to 2 Kings chapter 17, verses 3 through 6, all right? And it says, against him came up Salmanassar, king of Assyria, and Hoshea became his servant and gave him presents. And the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no presents to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria, and placed them in Halah and in harbor by the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. All right, so we see that in the 9th year of Hosea, the king of Assyria, Israel was captive. Israel was carried away captive into Assyria. Continue to read on that, and we're going to jump to 2nd Esdras, and we're going to fast forward a little bit in time. And when we jump in 2nd Esdras, we're going to go to chapter 13, verses 40 through 45. And we're going to see that it reads, those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hoshea, the king whom Salmanasseh, the king of Assyria, led away captive. All right, so we're dealing with the same Israelites, the same Israel being carried away during this time. And he carried them over the waters. And so they came into another land. But they took counsel amongst themselves that they might leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further land where never mankind dwelt, that they might there keep their statutes which they never kept in their own land. All right, and they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow places of the river. For the Most High then showed signs for them, and held still the flood till they were passed over. For throughout that country there was a great way to go, namely of 1.5 years, and that same region is called Arsareth.
So that Arsareth that's the same scripture I started with weeks ago when I was talking about how Arsareth was also connected to Algeria and how they migrated down into West Africa there as well. So you can see how all these different connections goes back to this story where King Salmanasseh of Assyria took the people and of the northern kingdom or the tribe, what they call them, Ephraim, right? Ephraim or northern kingdom, or Israel. Israel's the 10 tribes, not the 2 that was left with Judah and Benjamin, but took them to captivity up in Assyria. So it's very important for us to understand that from a lineage standpoint of the stories of the people that's coming from into West Africa, as well as our DNA. As you start getting more into some of the archaeology digs, when they extracted DNA from those bones, why is some of that connected to us, right? When they tell us we're just from West Africa, nobody popped out of the ground anywhere in the world, right? The first 2 people, if you believe in that we're all everybody in the world came from 2 people. They started in one area, and then they migrated to all these other areas. So you got to understand, like, where did they migrate? Who were they when they migrated? People just didn't end up in West Africa. People just didn't pop up out of the ground and here in America, right? There was a migration that happened. However you feel, if it's Pangina or all these different ways of people talking about the migrations of people and stuff like that. But it started with 2 people. So you always got to keep on tracking back to understand, the full migration story. And at what point in time do you want to associate to those people? Do we want to associate to ourselves as African Americans? Do we want to associate ourselves just as West Africans? Do we want to associate ourselves all the way back to Israel, right? Or to Egypt? Because these people, if you get from Israel to West Africa, you got to go through Egypt, right? Or you have to go down and go across to like Ethiopia. But, those are the reasons why a lot of the migration stories, people say, hey, we come from Egypt. But as you see, Egypt even had black slaves themselves. So what's the difference between those who were in control, who were Egyptian, and those who are, the slaves of the Egyptians, right? So you got to understand that too. So, all right.
All right, so there's been a lot of debates on where some of the 10 tribes went, you feel me, and where they are today. But what we're going to show you is that some of these 10 tribes or some of these tribes ended up wandering off into Eboe land. All right. And to review that, we're going to go to Eboe history, Hebrew exiles of Erie Kingdom. And it says, an estimated number of 400,000 Hebrews left Israel after King Salmanasseh V of Assyria defeated Israel, and drove the inhabitants after rendering the entire land desolate, and arrived in the apparent safe territory of Nigeria in about 638 BCE. All right. Let me read that again, because it says that 400,000 Hebrews left Israel after King Salmanasseh of Assyria defeated Israel, all right, drove them away and rendered their entire land desolate. All right, they arrived in the apparent safe territory, all right? So they arrived in safe territory of Nigeria in about 638 BCE. They camped first at Chad Basin in northeastern Nigeria from Israel via Egypt, Libya, and Sudan. They left Chad Basin and camped around Zaria. Area, including the Note cultural areas. Some left Zaria/Note culture areas of Benue Plateau and camped in Igala, all right, which can be found in 1 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 22, and Edomah, which is in Isaiah 63 and verse 1. Furthermore, it was obvious at this stage that the Hebrew Israelites were heading towards the eastern region in the area where their compatriots Eboe and his descendants had settled for over 2,000 years. All right. It was obvious at this stage that the Hebrew Israelites were heading towards the eastern region in the area where their compatriots Eri and his descendants had settled for 2,000 years. All right, so this is where you see Israelites migrating back into Nigeria after the Assyrian exile, right? Because they already knew of their brethren that was already within Western Africa.
When the Assyrians actually attacked and exiled the 10 tribes of Israel, the Northern Kingdom, in 722 BC. From that period, all the 10 tribes were scattered. The bulk, according to Mazutra, were taken to Africa. So
once again, we have that confirmed by a Igbo brother himself. Just confirming what we just reviewed, that another migration of Ebos, or Israelites as I say, made their way into Western Africa after the Assyrian captivity. All right. We can take it even to the Ashkenazim Talmud. All right. And here's all the information you'll need to find this. And it would tells us the same exact thing. It says, the Gemara asks, to where did Sennacherib exile the 10 tribes? And if you don't know, Sennacherib is the person that came up after Salmanasseh, right? So it says, to where did Sennacherib exile the 10 tribes? Mazutra says he exiled them to Afriki, all right? Let me read that again. To where did Sennacherib exile the 10 tribes? And it says, Mazutra says he exiled them to Afrikis. All right, so even amongst the Ashkenazim, it was known that the 10 tribes went into Afriki, also known as Africa. But we're going to continue to dig on that furthermore in the video. We're going to be jumping back to Finding Gad, the quest for the lost tribe of Gad. I'm going to start at the very top.
All right, so that's enough, but just showing you how, you know, the Ebos came, and they came from multiple tribes of Israel, not just Gad, but Gad was the popular one because they, you know, were able to keep their history, but was multiple migrations as well. It just wasn't one migration that came, so multiple people came, and they spread throughout even Nigeria. And as we heard in the videos last Shabbat, it talked about how they were among all the other tribes at one time, and that's, you know, because of the war and the issues, they start migrating to that one area of Biafra, and then that's when, you know, they were being attacked by some of the other tribes, and then they were, you know, a lot of them also were sent into slavery, and you know, but the Biafra War came after slavery. But you can kind of see how some of the stuff actually occurred, you know, during that history and that time, and, you know, the migrations and all the way into who we are now. So, you know, T.D. Jakes and all the other people are talking about being connected. They're having documentaries and film, and we don't have a clue about any of this, right? So to get it kind of more personal, Shabbat Shalom, Elder Thomas and cousin Atkinson, Miss Atkinson. So to get it more personal, I want to kind of show, connection to me, right? So it's one thing to talk about it, a far view and these people, but we're these people. So this is just, of course, we're from multiple tribes. So I'm gonna just show you, how it's connected back to people here, even in America. All right. So next. So we can see here when we're talking about that Biafra, brighter Biafra, we talked about that before. You can see where the blue is and how the blue connects on the right to the left. So we can see that a large majority of the Virginia slaves, 36%, came from the Bight of Biafra. And then here in North Carolina to Georgia, it says 2% in blue, right? And then down in LA, you can see 10%, where those slaves kind of came. So we're going to focus on the Virginia area, where a lot of North Carolina, right? North Carolina didn't have a lot of slaves that came directly to North Carolina because of the Outer Banks. So usually they went to South Carolina or to Virginia, and then they took them, through the smaller boats through some of the rivers and stuff through North Carolina, or they migrated across land, right? As well. So just think that as well. So next. All right, and then it says there, right, the Bight of Biafra, the middle part. We showed this last time, but I didn't read as much. The Bight of Biafra comprised contemporary southeastern Nigeria, Cameroon, and Gabon. African captives from the Bight of Biafra represent approximately 24%, or 98,400 of all African captives sold in North America. So majority, a lot of the people that came to North America was of this area, Bight of Biafra, right? And it says sold in North America, including 37 to 40% of Africans sold in Virginia. So if you got some history from Virginia, good majority of them, remember, because there's more than just like 2 tribes. There's like, 5 different places that was major of the, that they were bringing people from Africa. But even within there's multiple tribes that they were bringing from those areas. But it says 37 to 40% of the Africans sold in Virginia, 9% sold in Louisiana, and 2% in South Carolina. So we can see that, majority of those went to Virginia. Pre-colonial kingdoms in the Bight of Biafra included, and these are the kingdoms. So when you start hearing these kingdoms, right, if you're looking at documentaries or movies even, you start hearing some of these kingdoms being popped up. So it's very important if you're looking up your DNA to understand some of these connections to some of these kingdoms, like the Bornu Empire. That's where my cousins from Sudan, he talks about that as well, right, and how some of those people migrated over here. So the Bight of Biafra contained a number of ethnic groups, including the Igbo, Ibolo, Igala, Efik, Ijo, and so forth, right? So that's important, right? So because if we go to the next slide, remember this article talked about that some of these people, the Anag, the Efik, the Eboe, the Igbo, Yoruba, that they were, connected to Jewish culture. So that's important because you got to make these connections, because when it talks about the Assyrian root, right? So that's what he was talking about in the Talmud, talks about how they came out of Assyria, right? So they know this, right? Connection to how these people went into West Africa. But this is important because next, if you go to Ancestry.com now, they start telling you about the different tribes that you connect to, at least one person, right? But what does that say there at the bottom? It says Eboe, Igbo, Yoruba. That's my DNA. So it shows us that we connect to some of these tribes here they're saying that's connected to the Israelites, right? So, but if you just go on Ancestry and look at these tribes, you won't have any clue because they're not going to say anything about their migration stories and stuff as well. But also at the top, you can see it says, where do people with this region live? It says primary location, Nigeria. Also found in Benin, Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, Gambia, I can't see, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. So these people migrated all over West Africa, right? Along with some of those tribes migrated all across West Africa. So a lot of them are now, through slavery, are integrated and running through colonial period of when they were getting colonized. They were running around and, intermarrying and everything else, right? But on the right, it talks about early North Carolina African Americans, right? So it connects me that to the Deep South African Americans and Eastern Central Coastal Plains African Americans. And then it actually connects one of my ancestors somehow, Mary. But then at the bottom, it says Lower Chesapeake Bay. Where's that? That's in Virginia. To northeastern North Carolina African Americans. So it shows you how they migrated from Virginia into North Carolina, right? And then they spread. So I know some of my family history coming from Virginia into North Carolina. So next. So you can do that too. If you got Ancestry, just go there, look at the tribes. And this is the Frontier Museum in Virginia, and they even talk about it. They have a Igbo village there, and might talk about this more in the future. But it says nearly 40% of the African Americans reported in Virginia during the time were bought from a part of West Africa coastal coast called the Bight of Biafra. Many of the captives were Igbo, a people living in upland area north of the Bight of Biafra in what is now the nation of Nigeria. The West African farm represents the life in the free Igbo household in the Biafran hinterlands in the 1700s. So I got some when I'm walking around and videotaping, I might show y'all. But you can see that they even have a whole museum that talks about our connection back to the Eboe people. And even at this museum, they have an event where all the Ebos around the world come and meet. So, they're not talking about we Israelites or nothing like that. They're talking more about their West African Eboe culture. But it's very interesting that they have this connection to Virginia in all this conversation, and most people don't even know about the Ebos at all. So next. So this is a story that I got from one of my cousins, right? And he talks about how, our bloodline goes through Virginia, and they knew they were Ebos. So it says, John always told his granddaughter, Bessie, that his family were from Nigeria and Mali. It is determined that John's family line came to Americas through Jamestown, Virginia, based on DNA analysis from Ancestry. During the years 1771 to 1844, John's family was split up and sent to other locations. That is known that before the ship docked in Jamestown, they deported some slaves in Brazil, the British Islands, and Jamaica. So I got family I found down there, right? According to cousin Ogo Uduchi, her grandfather Ezigo showed his daughter the pathway to underground entrance where the slaves were taken. The nearest port to Anambra State is Calabar. Remember we talked about that, right? Anambra, I told y'all to remember those names and stuff. State in Calabar. Located in the Cross River State in Nigeria Delta. We talked about the Cross River last week, right? What happened there was horrific. The captured relatives would have to walk for days with little to no food and chain together so that they wouldn't be able to run away. Many of the people were lied to and told they were going to work and come back. So some people gave up their relatives to represent them. This occurred during the years 1771 to 1780 when the Africans left their land. They left everything about them behind while the slaves were walking the path. They were given water to drink that was spiked with drugs so they would be sedated. Children were separated from their mothers, and mothers were separated from the men. While on the boat, they spent 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes 13 weeks before they reached the States. We are from the Igbo tribe of Nigeria, people of the Biafra. The Igbo people lived in the southern part of Nigeria. They are comprised of the Abi, the Anambra, the Abonya, the Unungu, and Imo State. So that's straight from the Brown family. So Browns in Virginia, some of them actually came straight from Igbo, and came here to also sent to Georgia and also to North Carolina as well. So I know my connection to his family, and that connects to this. So it just shows you how you saw Igbo in my family. This is why. All right. So next, and this, remember we talked about the Cross River last week and the Calabar River. So you can hear that in the story that was given about the Cross River and Calabar and how that was all connected. All right, so next. So this is even in North Carolina. There's a town called Taylortown, North Carolina, and Demas Taylor, he's known that he was from the Eboe tribe. And he started a town here in North Carolina. So that shows you how the Ebos are here in North Carolina where we live. Taylortown, just go type Google Taylortown, North Carolina. And it actually talks about the story of how he started the town. He was Eboe. So my DNA talks about 22.2%. It says a lot of it comes from Anambra, right? Where there's 98% Igbo or Eboe. So, and then it also connects to the Yoruba, I think, because some of that, ancient bloodline is connected anyway. So next. And then me and my son, we went to, he had to have his driving, get his hours in when he was 16 to drive. So we drove all around the different places. And you can see him there in front of the sign that says Free Blacks of Israel Hill. And it says, just to the west here lies Israel Hill, settled to, I'm kind of guessing some of these words are so small, 1810, I think that says 1811, by approximately 90 formerly enslaved persons who received freedom and 350 acres from Judith Randolph under the will of her husband, Richard Randolph. This is important, cousin of Thomas Jefferson. These Israelites and other free African American worked as farmers, craft people, and so forth, right? So it shows you that these people actually lived in this area, called themselves Israelites, and came from the cousin of Thomas Jefferson. Keep that in mind. So on the right, you can see some of the family that's connected to that area. Not my family, but just general family that's connected to that area. And that William Mary guy, he's a white Euro-American that wrote this book about Israel on the I can never say that, Appomattox, or however you say it. But that's a very popular area. But they were suing people before slavery after they got freed. They were suing white people, black people, they were suing, and they were winning because they were freed even before slavery even ended. But keep in mind, it says that this Richard Randolph, cousin of Thomas Jefferson. All right, so let's make this connection. So Thomas Jefferson, usually, you inherit your family's, your father's inheritance. When he died, you inherit slaves too. So usually some of the slaves that they would inherit it would have been connected to the same tribes because, they're basically descended. Now, they might have mixed with other tribes and bred them and stuff like that. But we can see that Thomas Jefferson, if we go to the next slide, talks about the Jefferson Monticello, is a historical place, and it talks about where were some people enslaved at Monticello born in Africa. And just to skip over for time's sake, it says, based on what is known, the 18th century slave trade to Virginia ports, the forebears of those enslaved at Monticello were most likely brought from West Africa, especially the land of the Eboe in present Nigeria. So it just shows you that those are probably Eboe slaves that would also live there in Virginia on Israel Hill. So just type in Israel Hill, look at the history there, and it says that Ebos are very rebellious. So we got Nat Turner in that area as well, right? In Virginia that came very, he was rebellious. We'll read some of that next week, y'all willing. But some of the other states didn't even want Eboe slaves because they were so rebellious. So they were having to go to Virginia, only place that would mostly take them. So that's why you saw like 2% or 3% of the Eboe slaves going to like North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia because they didn't want them. They said they were too rebellious. So, all right, next. So even like we said, it was so rebellious because you got Gabriel Prosper. This is in 1776. So this is way, they try to say that the Hebrew Israelite movement came recently between, like close to the 1900s with some of the people like Frank Cherry and people like that. But you can see in 1776, this is a historical example, supports this hypothesis. A slave uprising took place in Richmond, Virginia, at the beginning of the 19th century, which was led by a slave called Gabriel Prosper, an outstanding personality who had acquired some knowledge of the Bible. He frequently referred to it in order to convince his brothers that they were descendants of the Israelites and that God would free them from slavery as he had their ancestors. He identified himself with Samson, his favorite biblical character. So, he actually took some connections, but it was, before they could rebel, somebody snitched on them and caused them to, a whole bunch of people to die. But even there was some European Americans that was helping them to try to get free as well. So, it just shows you that, some people actually had some identification of, trying to have some compassion on these people and knowing, possibly who they were, which we saw. Well, I haven't showed that book. I put that on my Facebook page, but where some African-American ministers actually talked about the connection of the Israelites and how the Europeans knew, and that's the reason why they were helping them throughout the churches also. All right. So